In this video, I am applying buttons to my jacket. It has been made, finished and pressed, so this is the last thing to do. I'm doing this just how I kind of like to do it. I have also linked a playlist of other videos about sewing on buttons. I just really want to promote keeping an open mind with regard to different methods in all aspects. Thread-wise, to sew buttonholes, you need buttonhole twist, and I like to use the same buttonhole twist to sew on the buttons. This is for the sake of uniformity and the fact that it will effectively hold buttons to the jacket. Take a length of the twist and wax it. Without pressing it yet, threading the needle will coil the thread around itself. I find it easiest if we stick the needle somewhere and hold the two ends taut, twisting them together with a rolling motion. There are many ways you can roll it. I prefer to roll it between my fore and index fingers in alternating hands to do it most quickly. We need to keep it held taut so that it doesn't twist around itself, and more importantly, we need to hold the ends so that it doesn't uncoil. When it is quite densely coiled, we'll put it through wax again, holding it tightly so that it doesn't twist around itself. We don't want to have coiled too much twist because otherwise it's more likely to unravel and more difficult to twist nicely. You can see that after it gets waxed it becomes much more docile, though I still want to twist it a little more. To preserve the coiling and prevent the thread from twisting, we need to iron the wax thread in order to remove the excess wax and melt it into the silk. This practically seems to cause the two sides to become one usable filament, and it becomes much less lively after it is pressed. I'll start with the basic front button. We need to know where the button is going to be. Since all of the mark stitches should have been removed, we need to find the exact waist to be level with the buttonhole so that there is maximum waist suppression. One way is to hold the front edges together, lining up the tips of the lapels, making them flat together, holding the buttonhole tightly to the other front, though it would be more direct to fold it around inside out and put the fronts together instead of the facings. Using a chalk pencil might be easiest, but any marking instrument will do, marking through the hole. While I'm here, I'm marking the second hole as well. In this jacket's case, the pattern was very formulaic, so I want the button to be about 2 centimeters from the front edge, though still very level with the hole. With the needle and thread, we can do a couple of things to start, but one is to tie a knot in the end of the thread, cutting off any excess beyond the knot. Stick the needle through the front where the button is going to go. The knot will be hidden in the shank. Send the needle back to the front and either do another stitch to anchor the stitch or get your button. There are a few ways to sew down buttons, but for now I will just sew them down with a cross. Send the needle through the first hole, then back through the opposing hole. Send the needle through the cloth again, though at a slight angle so that we can create a smaller area of thread, almost like a prick stitch on the facing side. Pull the thread tight, pulling the button towards the jacket. The button needs a shank, so as you pull it, you need to leave the button with a few millimeters of thread. We should check with the other jacket whether the cloth can fit between the cloth and the button, and then you need a little bit of excess, so that when the shank is wrapped and the threads are pulled together, shortening the shank, the other front still fits in there. Send the needle up to the front at an angle to sew through another one of the virgin holes, sewing through the opposing hole again, straight into the cloth towards the smaller area on the other side. What can be very easy to do at this stage is to pull the button closer to the cloth with every subsequent stitch. It's very important that we don't pull the thread tight. We need to preserve the excess, keeping the button loose. Sew through one of the first holes again, and then through the second pair of holes. With this coiled buttonhole twist, it's enough to sew them 4 or 5 times. I usually go for 4. We can send the needle through the button or the cloth one more time, where we can start wrapping the thread around the shank. We need to cover the shank and tighten the individual threads together. We will only need to go around 4 to 7 times before tying it off, nothing specific. Go around the last time, pulling close to the cloth, but without pulling the coil tight. Thread the needle into the loop and then pull it taut. Stick the needle through the shank and thread the needle through the loop again before pulling it tight. To lose the trailing thread, send the needle to the facing side through the base of the shank. Then prick stitch a few centimeters away from the button, ideally towards the seam, and cut off the thread. Since we've placed the second buttonhole, we know where the second button needs to go. Although an alternative way to begin the button, to anchor the thread, is to prick stitch towards the location of the button. Make a couple of stitches to tack the thread where the button sits before threading the button. We can do much the same with the second button, except it doesn't need a shank since it isn't functional. It's never going to be done up. It also doesn't need as many stitches to sew it down since it's not under as much stress, but for the sake of uniformity, maybe we want to do the same number as we did the first time, about 4. To fasten it, we can still wrap and stab the not quite shank and prick stitch away from the button. I am aware of 3 basic ways to sew the button's holes. I understand the cross is the common one. I've heard that parallel lines are more historic and traditional, but there was no source to back that up, don't quote me on it. Third, I kinda refer to as a clamshell. For the cross, I like to make the first cross and then the second stitch diagonally to that through the other holes. Then I alternate the holes with however many stitches I do. If you are above and beyond in attention to detail, you will think about how the buttons are oriented. You might want the buttons to show X's or plus signs. In this case, it's easy as you're stitching the button to hold it, but it can often rotate a little when we wrap the shank. Therefore, we need to hold the button firmly in position as you're wrapping the shank. Again, the best way to find where the buttons need to go is to lay the cuff closed and use a chalk pencil to mark the keyhole. Otherwise, any way that you can get an accurate bearing on where the button needs to go will do. My cuff here has 2 real and 2 sham buttonholes. Starting with the real ones, we can sew them down with 1 length of thread. We can anchor the thread whatever way we prefer. Again, we need to give the thread a shank and of some sort because it needs to sit through the keyhole. Ideally, we want to avoid sewing through the lining on the inside of the cuff, only because it's unsightly. So trying to anchor the thread to the cloth and the silicia on the inside of it. So you need to stitch horizontally at the base of the shank. Here we only need 3 total stitches to hold the button to the cuff. It'll almost never be under the same stress as the front button, so it'll be okay. We coil around the shank the same as before and fasten it. Although instead of stitching away and cutting the thread, it saves time and effort to just send the needle between the cloth and come out where the next button is going to sit. Anchor the thread there and sew down the next button. If you had more buttonholes, then you'd keep going until you run out of thread or buttons. Otherwise, securing the thread, stitching away and cutting the excess. I also say in the Sham buttonhole video, we can sew the buttons onto the Shams only sewing to the top sleeve without a shank. Plus, again, we can use a single length of prepared buttonhole twist. We could sew these ones through the whole top sleeve rather than just attaching them to the top layer of the cloth. For the sake of uniformity, we should stitch the button 3 times again, which is about the minimum for any button. When you have a tab and button closure on your inside pockets, those need a button as well. For the last time with the same prepared thread, though you may like a different colour since it doesn't have a buttonhole. With the pocket sitting closed, we can knot the thread, cutting the excess again to stick the needle into the base of the tab for the location. Send the needle through the cloth to the inside of the pocket. Come back to the front and begin to sew the button down much like we do the front button, but it doesn't particularly need a shank. It also only needs about 3 stitches, same as the cuffs. Fastening around the non-shank and on the inside of the pocket, we can stitch upwards towards the opening to cut away the excess.